It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife.
And that wife must chase him for everything he's worth.
And her mother will embarrass her and everyone around her until the marriage.
We might have altered it slightly.
Every classic can do with a revision.
Right. Right. Well, greetings. This is the first episode of the We Read Books podcast. I am Whitney. Yeah, yay! I ruined it. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. Yes, yay. I am Whitney, but you'll probably hear me referred to as Whit.
What a wit.
What a wit.
How cute. My name's Maddy, and we just wanted to do a podcast where we read books and then tell you about them.
Right. We talk about books pretty much all the time, and we just thought, why not see if other people want to talk about books with us?
Exactly. And that's really all there is to the show.
Yep.
Pretty straightforward.
We talk about books. Hopefully you like our opinions, or at least makes you think.
Yeah. Or you can cleverly disagree.
Yes, disagreement is always welcome and allowed.
But we will shame you mercilessly. Also, I guess it kind of goes without saying that spoilers in every single episode.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about your feelings on a book without also discussing said book. So
Exactly.
Every episode is going to be spoilers. Maybe the first couple episodes will say so, but
Yeah.
after a while, it's just spoilers. You're not going to get them. You're not going to get a warning every time.
Right. And I feel like if you're out here searching for a show that discusses a book, you have to go in with your eyes open. You know,
Right.
they're going to talk about how it is.
Right. Yeah.
Because why spend an hour of your time listening to someone talk about a book but not discuss the ending?
Or their because you can't really discuss your feelings on it and back it up or justify it without saying why. But the why is the details of the book. So
Exactly. Exactly. We do have an Instagram and a TikTok. Both of them are at We Read Books Pod. Just super easy. We don't have other social media because Twitter is terrible and Facebook is antiquated, so
yeah.
sorry.
There may be a YouTube eventually, but right now.
Yes. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
We will get there eventually.
Yep.
The struggle was real enough to get this mic set up, so God only knows what will happen if we bring a camera into the mix.
Right. Gotta get the mics and the situation set up before we tackle that monster. So
It's as if I did not have like a podcast for 2.5 years previously.
we can blame it on me because this will be my first podcast. What? My first podcast.
Alrighty. Now, if some of you didn't know by our cold open, we are doing Pride and Prejudice for our very first book.
Yay!
Yay!
This was my first time reading Pride and Prejudice, and I believe Maddie has read it many a time.
I would say countless times, probably. It's a classic.
It is.
It's a lot of people don't like the classics, but
I would say that at least half the people that quote unquote don't like classics are just intimidated by classics.
Yeah.
And that I fell into that category. I had never read it simply because I was worried it would be difficult for me to read or something of that nature, that it would just be too highbrow for my uneducated self. But it's a great read. You know, it's especially once you get used to the flow of conversation, it's easy to follow along. You're not sitting there going, what?
Yeah. And it's like reading anything in a new genre. If you like typically read, I don't know, like contemporary fiction, and then you want to try a fantasy, it's a whole different style, and you just have to adjust. There's going to be growing pains, but
oh, absolutely,
you'll get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're not going to like shame you for not liking classics, though.
Right.
I do see that a lot on TikTok. There will be, because like the book side of TikTok, they call it book talk, which is whatever. But on TikTok, I see a lot. There's like a divide. There are people that read like your fantasy romance, and that's like all they read is fantasy romance, which is read what you want to read. Like at the end of the day, literally no one cares.
Right.
Like,
well, you read for your own enjoyment, not for the, I mean, I guess some people could read for this, whatever status that could possibly bring them with others, but reading, you don't really get anything out of reading unless you're enjoying what you're reading. So, or it's at least provoking something from you.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. And then you have like the other camp of people who are like, if you're not reading this, and this, you're not really reading.
Right.
Which is really silly too.
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Now, one out of the two of us does have a doctorate in literature.
I only have a master's.
Oh, so sorry. A master's.
I don't want any false pretensions out here.
Right. I apologize.
I do want a doctorate, though.
You could absolutely get it. So let me rephrase. Out of the two of us, one of us has a master's in literature, and the other one did not even finish community college. And that's okay. Everyone can enjoy all kinds of books.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people expect someone who studied it to be more of like a
hoity-toity.
Very haughty about it.
Yes,
but
haughty.
I mean, I'll read anything from like the highest highbrow from the canon all the way down to like dirt smut. Yeah. Like, I'll read it. I might not like it,
but you give it a shot.
I'll read it, and I'm not gonna be like, oh, what an idiot over here.
Right. You enjoy that? Ew.
Gross. Look at you with your smut.
Well, now that we've veered very far off course, we can discuss Pride and Prejudice.
Yes. Okie dokie. So we'll give you a few blurbs on the novel itself, like details, and then we will hop into the meat. So it was written by Jane Austen. I don't know if we said that at the beginning.
I'm not sure either.
But it was written by Jane Austen. Published on January 28th, 1813 in 3 separate volumes, which was really common for this time period instead of, because it's not a very long novel. It's actually relatively short. I mean, like 400 and some odd pages. But back then they would publish serially a lot, like in the paper even. I know Dickens did that with a lot of his novels. Mm-hmm. They were published weekly in like the paper.
Was Edgar Allan Poe stuff published that way as well?
I believe so. Yeah. And a lot of his also, since they were short stories, he would just publish the short story in the paper. And but it was a little different here in the US as opposed to in England. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that era of writing was published in series. But this one was published in 3 series or volumes, and it was published anonymously originally because Jane Austen was a woman.
How dare she?
Oh, how dare she be born a girl. But all of her novels were published anonymously originally. So her first published work was Sense and Sensibility, and then whenever Pride and Prejudice was published, it was listed as by the author of Sense and Sensibility. So they were connected, and it was known that the same writer was writing all of these works. It just was anonymous.
Yeah. I think that was smart, so people who enjoyed the work could follow along even though it was under anonymous. Because if they were all separately anonymous,
then you wouldn't know that they're connected. And I mean, obviously the stories don't overlap, but stylistically they're very similar. Yeah. So it makes me hyper sad that she couldn't publish a book because she was a woman.
Yeah. Was not acceptable back then, but there were other women publishing works as well, but it wasn't easy, and many publishing houses would not accept manuscripts from women, so I would assume they had to do it anonymously or under a pen name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe the 3 Bronte sisters published under a pen name originally. I know Charlotte did for sure, but I'm trying to think, because Emily Bronte only wrote Wuthering Heights. That was her only novel. She wrote poetry aside from that. And then Anne, I think she only wrote Agnes Grey. But I think at least Charlotte published under a pen name originally and then got credit for it afterwards. But it's just the hoops, you know?
I know. And yeah, shout out to Jane's brother, because her name was not attached to her novels until after her death. Her brother Henry added all of her 6 novels, her brother Henry had all of her 6 novels attributed to her posthumously. So, way to go, bro. That's good big brother vibes right there.
Yeah. Good job, Henry. Way to go.
Because he really, he could have been like, hey,
I wrote
those.
Yeah.
So, that's a good brother.
Yeah. Who would question him?
No one. No one would have been able to.
He was a man of middle-class birth. I think I know that their father was in the clergy. I don't know if Henry was a clergyman, but they're fairly respected in the community. They were like, oh yeah, Henry, sure, he wrote this.
Yeah. Believable.
So, yeah. And Jane died on July 18th, 1817. Fun fact, that's my birthday.
Sad yet cool.
Yeah.
That you can share something with Jane Austen.
Yeah. Oh. Poor Jane. She was only 41 when she died.
That's very young.
So young, especially when I think about the fact that I'm 32.
Yeah, and I'll be 35 here in a couple months, so I'd be old age at this point.
Yeah.
If that was the lifespan. The typical lifespan, I should say.
I feel like that was still young then.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say like the average age for the back in the day, pre-industrial revolution era, is like average age was like 60 or something. Mm-hmm. But they're not taking into account that the mortality for childbirth was super high. Like the mortality rate was so high, and the odds of someone dying at birth or a woman dying in childbirth were super high. So that skews the lifespan expectancy.
Oh, because taking the average. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're out here as a man, you're probably living until like your 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Likely.
Yeah.
God, we just get the short end of the stick on everything. Our lives are shorter.
We're just working hard out here, okay?
We need to get some credit.
Yeah.
The female species needs credit.
Right.
Okay. Short synopsis of the story for those of you who have not read it. It might be a better idea to just go read it, but if you don't want to. We're set in the late 18th century, early 19th century. The novel was actually written in 1790, but it wasn't published until 1813. So, right there at the turn of the century.
Right.
We're in England, and we're centered around the Bennet family, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and their 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Elizabeth is our protagonist. Jane is kind of our second main female character. Yeah. Mrs. Bennet, her only concern is to find husbands for her daughters. She's out here to get them married. Mainly because the Longbourn estate, which is the Bennet family estate, is entailed to the male line of the family. So since Mr. and Mrs. Bennet do not have any sons, on the death of Mr. Bennet, the Longbourn estate is going to pass to the next male heir, Mr. Collins. And because of that, if the girls are not married by the time Mr. Bennet dies, they would be homeless, essentially, destitute.
Assuming that he kicks them out. You would hope he'd be nicer.
Right.
But I guess you never know.
You never know. So it's understandable why she's so focused on them getting married. But it's also, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right?
Right.
Freaking primogeniture. I'm telling you. The whole concept of this book is girls just out here getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Left and right.
Right. Not to say that the guys had it perfect either. You know, if you were a wealthy, good-looking man, I don't even know that you had to be good-looking, but if you were a wealthy man, you had ladies like Mrs. Bennet, or, you know, I don't know if women would, you know, go on their own behalf if their mothers kind of would usually do the beginning legwork, but either way, you were chased and treated like a little piece of candy.
Yeah.
to be had.
Yeah, essentially.
Some may have liked it. I'm sure others found it quite tiresome.
I'm sure it was tiresome. And, you know, sure. But either way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So this is kind of the setting that we're plunged into at the beginning of the novel. So we're following the Bennet sisters as they grapple with the trials and tribulations of courting in the early 19th century.
Yes.
You know, Jane...
I found this on the web.
Siri, this bitch, always be talking to me. She just eavesdropping on our conversations and then putting in her 2 cents. And it always happens so randomly.
Right. Yes. That almost startled me, actually. It was so oh my goodness.
So, long story short, we're mostly concerned about Jane and Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. And when a wealthy man by the name of Mr. Bingley moves into the neighborhood, Mrs. Bennet is like, that's the one. He's going to be for Jane, because Jane's the prettiest of my daughters.
And the oldest.
And the oldest.
And I think generally you would try and marry off your oldest before the younger ones, or just kind of whoever was desired the most.
I think because the Bennets are what they called landed gentry. So Mr. Bennet is a gentleman. He has this estate, but he doesn't like have a job. He's not like a tradesman or anything. Mm. So I think it's not necessarily as strict of rules as far as when daughters are presented to society as in like high society. Gotcha. But I think in like high society, the oldest comes out first and the younger daughters do not come out until the eldest are married. Mm. I think that's the technical rules. Yes. But Mrs. Bennet's like, right. They're all out. Yeah.
They're all available.
Pick the one you want and you can have her. So that's what we're dealing with here. Mr. Bingley is in the area and he's up for grabs. And he brings his friend, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is technically up for grabs as well. So who can land him?
Right. It becomes a race.
It's a race to the altar at this point.
Oh, goodness. So, Pride and Prejudice was received well by critics. Austen's writing style in particular was praised. Her prose is gorgeous, of course. I really enjoyed it, again, as a first-time reader of her work. I really did enjoy it. Yeah. Pride and Prejudice was a revolutionary novel in its time. The American scholar Claudia L. Johnson defended the novel from the criticism that it has an unrealistic fairy tale quality. One critic, Mary Poovey, wrote that the romantic conclusion of Pride and Prejudice is an attempt to hedge the conflict between the individualistic perspective inherent in the bourgeois value system and the authoritarian hierarchy retained from traditional paternalistic society. Johnson wrote that Austen's view of a power structure capable of reformation was not an escape from conflict. Johnson wrote the outrageous unconventionality of Elizabeth Bennet was in Austen's own time very daring, especially given the strict censorship that was imposed in Britain by the Prime Minister William Pitt in the not the 19s.
I know. I do that every single time.
Born in the 19-somethings. You just can't help yourself.
Can't.
This was in the 1790s when Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. So, the character of Elizabeth Bennet in particular is highly controversial. Obviously, not now, but in 1790, when Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice, the character of Elizabeth Bennet was outrageous. I mean, not only does she reject 2 offers of marriage, but one of those offers of marriage is someone who is superior to her in rank in society, who far outstrips the wealth of her family. It would be so unheard of to be proposed to by a man of that caliber and then reject him.
Right. Thank God her mom didn't know about it.
Whoa. Yeah. So not only would that be considered completely brazen, and technically, if her parents had known about that proposal and were like, well, she can't speak for herself, her father could have accepted the proposal of marriage on her behalf and forced her to marry him.
Luckily, Mr. Bennet is not that type of man.
He would not do that. I mean,
but the fact that he could have.
Exactly. And that's what Mrs. Bennet, the first offer of marriage, she wanted Mr. Bennet to force Elizabeth to marry Mr. Collins.
Right.
That was like her objective.
Right.
And luckily, Mr. Bennet is relatively progressive for his time. And loves Elizabeth.
Yes.
And was not going to force her to marry him. Right. But it just...
I think her outspokenness is one of the reasons she was his quote-unquote favorite child.
Yes. Yes. She's clever. She's witty. She's unafraid to, like, give her opinion and doesn't really care who she's speaking with.
Right.
So. Not
very unlike the person she ends up with. He's just much more reserved.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, the character of Elizabeth alone makes the novel a bold statement in the time. I do understand when they say it has a fairy tale ending, but I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Well, and to them, maybe back then that was such a fairy tale to marry for love, but
yeah.
That's normal nowadays. Exactly. So it's not as fantastical as it may have seemed back then. Like, oh, they were able to wait till they found someone they loved? Preposterous.
She should have done her familial duty.
Right. Yes. Ugh.
I know. It's so crazy, but I loved Elizabeth.
Yes.
And I think Elizabeth's character is really the only way that Jane was able to, like, critique the society that she lived in without being censured by the actual government.
Yeah. You kind of got unique perspectives from each character on the situation, so it wasn't like it was hammering home one specific viewpoint. You kind of saw it from several different points of view to give you a well-rounded idea of the expectation of the times. So perhaps they didn't see it as a knock on it completely because they were like, well, some of these characters are behaving sensibly at least.
Right. Yeah. And a good comparison between Elizabeth and Darcy, who she eventually marries, would be Mr. Collins and Charlotte. not that either one is, well, I'm sure that Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are wildly happier than Mr. Collins and Charlotte, but I think their motivations have equal merit, you know, when taking everything in context, but...
Yeah, absolutely.
So, starting with Elizabeth and Darcy, and really Jane and Bingley, because they all kind of, like, you have, like, really kind of the opening scene at the ball.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning, really, for the movie, and mostly for the book, too.
Yeah. For the book, it's the discussion between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet about Bingley coming to town and the girls being all, you know, aflutter, or the mother getting them all aflutter about it.
Yeah.
But then, yes, that's where things, I would say, definitely kick off, is the party.
Yeah. So they're in Hertfordshire, and specifically in the town of Meryton is, like, the nearest town to Longbourn. And they're at their ball, you know, doing what you do at a ball.
Dancing. And I remember a line in the book, it basically talks about, like, you know, the best thing you can hope for at a party is to never be without a partner. How dare you be a wallflower?
Yeah. Yeah, it was so frowned upon to be introverted in this, like, society, which is one of the main areas of conflict through the novel is being introverted, which is odd. But so they're dancing, they're having a grand old time, and in walks Bingley, his two sisters, Caroline and Mrs. Hurst. I think her name was Louisa. Yes.
I think so.
So you have Bingley, his two sisters, and Mr. Darcy. Oh, and Mr. Hurst, who is...
I guess. He's just sort of there.
Yeah, he just exists. He doesn't play, like, a role.
No.
But...
And yeah, the book refers to people by last name primarily. Occasionally, you know, mainly Jane and Elizabeth, who was Eliza, and Lizzie also, but mostly everyone else was Miss or Mrs. or Mr. something.
Yes. Very, like, formal.
Yes, yeah.
So, Bingley almost immediately is like, who's that one? She's hot. Referring to Jane. Because Jane's supposed to be, like, the most beautiful.
Right. Fortunately, she's also very sweet and very kind. So... she's got all that going on. He doesn't know that yet, but...
Yeah. So, the introductions are made. Mr. Darcy is very aloof, very standoffish, and Elizabeth is immediately like...
What's this guy's deal?
What? Why?
What's your problem?
Yeah. Why are you so unamiable? And he's just like, silence.
If you're not fluttering about at a party like a butterfly, you're a weirdo.
You're wildly unlikable.
Yeah. and perceived proud.
And perceived as very proud. That's, I think, this ball kind of sets off how Darcy is perceived in that entire neighborhood for most of the novel. He refuses to dance with anyone as well. I mean, Bingley, he's super outgoing and charismatic, and he immediately is, like, in it.
Yeah.
He loves it.
Yeah.
He loves everyone. He dances with Jane, like, I don't even know how many times.
At least twice, and that was, like, a big win for Mrs. Bennet.
She would not shut up about how many times he danced with Jane.
Yes.
And...
in a row, in fact. Perhaps.
In fact. And he did dance with Charlotte Lucas, but Charlotte Lucas is so plain.
Right.
He would never like her.
Poor plain. Now, I will say, Mr. Darcy does say an unkind word about Elizabeth, but I dare say it's because everyone's being so pushy, and perhaps he's just like, leave me the heck alone.
Yeah.
She ain't my type. I don't dig how she looks. Leave me be. Yeah. Is it harsh and mean? For sure. Especially because she heard it. She wasn't supposed to.
She was not supposed to, but she, in fact, overheard.
But me being partial to Mr. Darcy, I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt that it was mostly like, get off my back. I don't want to go dance. Stop pushing me.
Exactly. Yeah, he They literally just arrived. They do not know any of these people.
Right.
They don't have, like, a connection who lived there previously or who lives there and, like, said, hey, you should come here. There's a place that you can rent.
Right.
They just rent this place and show up. So I get why Darcy is, like, he's having sensory overload right now.
Right.
And Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, Mr. Bingley's sisters, they're just being haughty little bitches.
Oh my gosh. They're pretty terrible in the beginning, and they just continue to get worse, especially Miss Bingley.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
She needs to... I don't know what she needs to do, but she needs to get out of her brother's business.
Yeah. And she's obviously thirsting after Darcy. She's like...
Hardcore.
Darcy. I'm right here. I am right here.
Hello, look at my empty hand. Do you want to put some sort of piece of jewelry on here that says you're going to marry me?
Exactly. Make me your wife.
Right. She couldn't request it more plainly other than grabbing his face and saying, marry me.
Exactly.
But I don't think women did that back then.
Nope. So, yeah. We also meet Charlotte here. Charlotte Lucas. The Lucases they're neighbors of the Bennets, and they're also middle class, but I think their estate is smaller, so their income is smaller than the Bennets. Charlotte is 27, so she old as hell. And unmarried. So, but I think Charlotte is incredibly astute. Clearly, wildly astute.
Yes.
And she makes a comment to Elizabeth. I don't think it's at this ball. I think it's at the ball that Mr. Bingley throws at his house.
Yes.
She says that Jane should show her affection for Bingley more. She should act like she loves him more than she does in order to secure him.
Yes, and to hide any flaws at all costs until the deal is sealed.
Exactly. And I think what's interesting is that Elizabeth doesn't see this at all. She doesn't see that Jane's demure demeanor would cast doubt on how she really feels about Bingley.
Right.
But Charlotte sees it. She's like, hey, tell her to ramp that up.
Right.
Because these people don't know.
Right. It just dawned on me, it's like she's so close to her sister who's very quiet and shy, and she ends up with a man who's shy.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not as quiet, but he's introverted and shy.
Yeah. So I have always thought Charlotte is just like, she's so observant and she's seeing everything. And it's probably a product of her situation in life as well.
Yes.
She's 27, she's unmarried, which is wildly old.
And I'm sure she's likely reminded.
She's probably
constantly.
reminded every single day that she's not married. And she's often referred to as plain. This is a relative term. I mean, what?
Plain is in the eye of the beholder, I think. But
I agree.
Apparently, a lot of people's eyes looked upon Charlotte and thought she was plain.
Yeah, poor Charlotte.
Poor Charlotte.
But
she knows the game, and she's
knows.
willing to play it.
That's right. And she doesn't have any romantic ideations. She's not, like, looking for love. She's looking for a husband to give her security for the rest of her life. Because her parents can't give it to her.
Right.
And she even says, I'm 27, I'm a burden to my parents.
Yeah.
So she has specific goals and reasons for getting married, and love is just not one.
Right. Which
is fair.
Yeah. No judgment on her, trying to take her future, and looking
she
for
has to.
Yeah.
Because she's too high in society to have a profession or like a job. She can't be like a maid or a seamstress. She could be a governess for like a high class family, but that's a degradation, right? And you're not ever fully secure because you're a governess for them until their kids are too old to have a governess, right? And then
you're done.
And then you're out. So the only way to make sure that your future is solid and that you're not going to have to worry about being homeless, which would have been essentially a death sentence at this time.
Oh, yeah.
Was to get married.
Yep.
So, that's it.
Right. So she's going to do what she's got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Girl knows, and she doesn't care.
Right.
It doesn't seem to bother her.
But she's not conniving. She's not trying to sneak in on anyone else's opportunities. It's just when the opportunity presents itself to her, she knows the game. She knows what's up.
Yeah.
And she takes it.
Exactly. And I think that Mr. Collins is the cousin of the Bennets who's going to inherit Longbourn. And he comes
for a visit
with the intention of proposing marriage to one of Mr. Bennet's daughters. In order to, like, ease the tension of, I'm taking this home from your family.
Right. And you could all get kicked out. So really I can say that is the nicest thing about Mr. Collins is that he's trying to be good to his family.
Yes.
In his own way. He's thinking, I want a wife, so these people don't have to worry. I'll pick one of them.
Yeah. And I do think that part of his motives were a bit altruistic. He was trying, he knew that this would ease some of the family tension.
Yes.
And so that is commendable. But I also think in his mind, he's like, this is going to be a sure thing.
Right.
So
one of these girls is going to marry me. I've heard a couple of them are quite foxy.
Yeah. The Bennett chicks are hot. And I think, he has very high conceptions of himself and his station.
Yes.
Even though he tries to use words that make him sound modest. Like
he'll say the way he's speaking about himself makes it sound like he's attempting to be humble, but in doing so,
yeah,
he's very boasting.
It's the epitome of a humble brag.
Yes.
That is Mr. Collins' personality.
His face should be in the dictionary next to humble brag.
Exactly.
That is him.
Yeah. I mean, he's a clergyman, and so he's in the parish of Rosings in Derbyshire, or however you say it. I'm so sorry. I am British in my heritage, but us Americans, we just botch all the words. I'm so sorry. But
please forgive us.
And he has very lofty ideas of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, his patroness, the owner of Rosings, blah, 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 Richie. She is the aunt to Mr. Darcy.
Yes.
So the Darcy...
That ties in, yes.
These are high-class people, upper-class people, rich, and Mr. Collins is the clergyman for Lady Catherine de Bourgh. So
yes.
He shares a garden with Rosings.
That he's very proud of.
He's super proud of it. He dines there, has tea there.
Mm-hmm. And he'll tell you all about it.
Tell you that Lady Catherine told him to get married.
Right.
And that he should find a modest and humble young lady to be his wife.
Right. But luckily for Jane, she is not engaged at this point, but it's pretty obvious that her and Mr. Bingley have a connection.
Yes.
And that connection is made stronger by her visit to Mr. Bingley's estate. At her mother's suggestion, she goes on horseback, not in a carriage, on horseback, and it's about to rain. So Mom's not worried about Jane getting sick, caught in the rain, getting hurt. No, she says, if you go on a horse and it rains, they're gonna let you stay the night.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be there longer.
Yeah.
Get over there.
Mrs. Bennet is tricksy.
Very tricksy. She doesn't even hide it. That's why it's like surprising that anyone's like, what do you mean she's tricksy?
She's so blatant in her contrivances.
Yes, very blatant.
And she's so shameless about it. It's like she doesn't care about it at all. Mm-hmm. And props to Mrs. Bennet.
Like you said, she's hustling out here for her daughters.
Yeah.
Shamelessly hustling.
Yeah. In this day and age, that hustle would be respected.
Yes.
Back then, it was seen as wildly uncouth.
Yes, yes. So Jane goes, it rains, she gets sick, and she has to hang out there for, I'm not sure how many days, but...
A handful of days.
Yeah. And then so Elizabeth comes to hang out with her, so then they're all still hanging out, getting to know each other. Jane's hanging out with Bingley, and then Elizabeth's hanging out with Darcy.
And Elizabeth is mounting her dislike for Darcy, just one on top of the other, on top of the other. And Darcy is like, Elizabeth Bennet. Whoa.
Yeah. Look at those eyes.
Excuse me.
Hello, ma'am.
Can I sit by you?
And it's so funny because I feel like when they are having... I find all of their discussions incredibly fascinating. It's just their different opinions. You can see where both of them are coming from. So every time that they spoke to each other, I perked up. Like, I loved those parts of the book. But it seems like he's just having a matter-of-fact discussion or just sharing his thoughts and opinions. And she's like, she's ready for a fight. She's like, oh, really?
Yeah. She's definitely trying to goad him, for sure.
Right.
And I think there is part of it where she is curious about who he is and what he's about. Like, what is making you so reserved and unapproachable and downright unlikable? Mm-hmm. She knows that there's something else, and she's trying to get there, but she's also being, like, really sarcastic.
Yes.
And she's pulling out her wit. She's pulling out her wit here.
Yes. But he even, like, kind of, to me, humbles himself and is just like, listen, talking to a lot of people that I don't know makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I don't feel like that's a declaration a lot of men especially would make in that time. I could be wrong, but...
I agree. I think especially someone of Mr. Darcy's rank in society is probably... Most of them are more likely to just stand on their hill and be like, I am right. I'm always right, no matter what.
Right. And I think he's probably supposed to be, you know, super charming and looking for a wife, and he's just over here trying to and I don't know if I'd say enjoy life, you know, just live his life in peace.
Yeah, in peace, yes. He doesn't... That's the funny thing about Darcy is he's not in pursuit of anything in particular. Mm-hmm. We don't see him courting any of the ladies. I mean, he doesn't even necessarily court Elizabeth, even though he eventually proposes to her twice.
Right.
But he's not courting her in the traditional sense, right? Like,
he's just spending time. Yeah, he's just kind of spending time around her, but it's not an equally known, hey, I'm attracted to you, let's hang out. It's just sort of like, ooh, I like her, I'm going to be around her more and get to know her.
He's doing it more as a solo venture than, like, Jane and Bingley, there's, like, mutual affection, and they're both, like, aware of it, even if it's unspoken.
Right.
So they're, like, hanging out, and there's hope on each side. Whereas with, like, Darcy and Elizabeth has absolutely zero notions of getting to know Darcy in an intimate manner. Mm-hmm. And would never even consider it.
Like, he offended her pride pretty much right off the gate. So
that first impression, she's like, nope.
Yep. And so that door at that time was very shut.
Yeah.
But her intrigue into Darcy is even more heightened once we meet Wickham.
Wickham.
Wickham. Smarmy is probably the best word I've ever thought to describe this man.
Yeah.
So he is in the military. The military moves to the area. And, of course, we haven't really talked about Kitty and Lydia, but they're very excited that this troop of men are hanging out nearby.
It's just like a bunch of officers.
Yeah.
And they're in their red coats.
Yes.
Right.
So Wickham is one of these officers, and he meets Elizabeth, and this man wastes no time trying to get super personal with her and tell her, hey, you know that Darcy guy that you ran into?
He did me dirty.
He did me dirty. I hope that you don't like him and like me.
Yeah. And I think this is where you see, this is really like where the errors in judgment come in. Mm-hmm. As for Elizabeth only, really.
Yes,
because, I mean, everybody's fooled by Wickham.
Yes.
Because he's charming and
he's the way you're supposed
outgoing.
to be.
Yeah.
In society.
Yeah, he's easy to talk to. Darcy even says that he makes friends easily, but whether he can keep them is a different matter, right? So
yes.
It's perfect.
It is very perfect because
for Wickham.
He's a smarmy little slimy troll.
He really is. He really is. And you forget that he's supposed to be, like, wildly handsome.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
He's technically, I think, supposed to be more handsome than Darcy. But I always forget that he's supposed to be so attractive because I'm just so off-put by him.
I think that's
general.
what disarms people a lot about him when they meet him,
Yes.
too. That his charm and then his apparent good looks.
Yeah. They always describe him as having a pleasing countenance and a very amiable air.
Yeah.
So these things just describe someone who is nice to look at and easy to talk to. Yes. It has nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah. We're not discussing substance of this man at all. Just the first impressions have people pretty set.
Like your face.
Yeah.
You're probably nice.
Yeah. So the impression that Wickham gives Elizabeth of Darcy continues to paint Darcy in a very unlikable light.
Yeah. Wickham and Darcy grew up together. Wickham's dad worked for Darcy's dad, and Darcy's dad really loved Wickham and wanted to, like, provide for him. So, when the late Mr. Darcy dies, in his will, he leaves a living for Wickham.
But it's stipulated that he has to go into the clergy, correct?
Yes.
And he doesn't.
He doesn't want to.
He doesn't want to. Counter to what he tells other people, he says, I was going to. No, he wasn't. He didn't want to.
Yeah, he forgets to tell Elizabeth that he didn't want to, but he just tells her that he was supposed to get this parish, a lucrative living from this parish as a clergyman, but that Mr. Darcy gave it to someone else and just left Wickham high and dry.
Right.
And that's the only story she gets. And she's like, what? How dare he?
Right. And that lines up with what she feels she knows about Darcy, so
she
believes it.
Yeah, she feels justified in her dislike.
Yes.
At this point.
Yes.
So we go on and on like this. Right. And so Wickham and her she's very attracted to Wickham, right? He's great. And then we have, like, the Netherfield ball, and he doesn't show up because Darcy's there, even though he just got done saying, if he doesn't like it, he can leave. I'm not going to leave. Right. But then he doesn't show up, right?
The coward doesn't show up because he knows he's full of lies.
Yeah, because he knows his story would not be able to stand up to scrutiny.
No.
So,
no.
He's not going to show up.
No.
But
Mr. Collins is still in town.
Mr. Collins will not go away.
Still vying for a wife. He had his eyes set on Jane. They said, no. We think
she
Jane's
might be spoken for.
Yeah, we think Jane's gonna get engaged soon. So then he goes, Elizabeth, hey, you were my first choice.
Exactly. So he follows her around like a little lost puppy.
Yes.
And she's like, get away from me.
Get out of here. Well, almost looking for reasons to try and distract him from her, and it does not work.
Yes. But luckily, when they go to the Netherfield ball, Charlotte is like, I'll chit-chat with Mr. Collins.
Right. I'll take him off your hands, so, Yeah. Because she knew Elizabeth did not want to talk to him. She was not being sly, sneaking in. She knew, hey, I'll help my friend out.
Exactly.
I don't even think that it really occurred to her that it could be an opportunity for her until later. Yeah. So just simply, I'll talk to him and get him out of your ear.
Yeah. And so, in all of this distress with Mr. Collins, Elizabeth just completely loses her mind and agrees to dance with Mr. Darcy.
What a choice!
I mean, They did the scene really well in the movie, I think.
Yes, they do. I love that by the end of their dance, everyone else, the room is empty and it's just the two of them.
Yeah.
Even though they're having a bit of a, I don't know if, would you say heated, contemptuous, or just, tense conversation?
I think tense is probably a good word.
Yeah.
They're having a tense exchange, and
because she's asking questions about what happened with Wickham and trying to be not obvious.
Veil it. Yeah. She's not saying Wickham, but she's trying to, and he says, once someone has my bad favor, they have it forever. Like,
but it takes him a lot of thinking and examining of a person to come to his final conclusion. Exactly. He doesn't make his final conclusion on a person quickly. He takes his time, but once it's set,
that's it.
It's done.
Yeah, and that's this conversation, I think she thinks is revealing his character in a negative light. Mm-hmm. But I feel a kinship with Mr. Darcy because I'm very similar in that manner. Mm-hmm. I might even be more of a snap judgment than Darcy. But for someone who Wickham, he grew up with Wickham. It took him years and years to see that Wickham was just a shisty person out for money.
Right.
But, and I think in the same vein, I am likely with friends to be more forgiving.
Yeah.
You have to really take it there for me to be like, all right.
Right. To completely write someone off. Yeah.
So, snap judgment on someone when you first meet them, though. I am bad that I do that.
Some people just lay their cards right out on the table, though.
They
don't leave anything for deeper investigation. It's just, here's me.
I agree.
I don't, and that's when you go, I don't vibe with what you're throwing out there.
Yeah, and that's, my rule. Whenever someone tells me who they are, I just believe them.
Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. Because people are always telling you who they are, verbally and non-verbally, and you just have to believe them.
Yes.
You can't project your own shit onto them because you're just fooling yourself.
Yes. Yeah. You set yourself up for disappointment if you do that.
You absolutely do. So, snap judgment or not, now I have yet to regret any of these judgments, so I don't know what that says.
Means that they're probably right.
But anyway, so the nether field ball is where we take the downhill here.
Yes.
So Jane and Bingley, they're loving it up, right? It's just...
But Jane is still shy.
Yeah, they're the only two in the room, but she is very demure. And old Darcy overhears Mrs. Bennet making some statements that could potentially ruin everything for Jane.
As we said before, she's very obvious in her intentions of, getting her daughters married, and she makes it even more boastful than before.
Yeah.
And Mr. Darcy hears this, and Mr. Darcy, being the good protective friend he is, may take that into consideration. Exactly. So Mrs. Bennet, I think, says something along the lines of, Jane will very likely be settled at Netherfield in 2 or 3 months hence or whatever. And her marrying rich will put the other girls in the way of rich men. Yep. And Mr. Darcy's like, nah. Right. So, and this is where, Charlotte's observation of Jane comes in, because then Darcy is like, well, if she really loves Bingley and Bingley really loves her, then the upstartness of Mrs. Bennet isn't necessarily going to matter. But he watches and he's like, she doesn't seem that into him. She's just being nice. She's not acting the way that a woman in love acts, right? According to him. So he convinces Bingley to close up shop and head back to London. Yeah. And his awful sisters, of course, are on board because we have not yet mentioned, but Miss Bingley is in love with Mr. Darcy. And so she's thinking, well, my brother can marry Mr. Darcy's little sister.
Exactly.
And we can be just one little happy family.
Yeah. And Darcy's sister, Georgiana, is probably 16 at this point.
Right. Sweet, lovely girl.
Yeah.
Like her a lot.
Yeah. She's great. We don't see her but until more towards the end. But she's a lovely girl, very, very shy again. But, yeah, so Miss Bingley, Caroline Bingley, and her sister they want to contrive Georgiana's marriage to Mr. Bingley and Caroline's to Mr. Darcy. So this is their goal in life.
Yes.
And so they're like, hey, when Mr. Darcy approaches them, like, I'm concerned, we should probably get him out of here and away from the Bennets.
Yeah. They're more than happy.
Oh, they're
ready.
Caroline was already packed.
Yes. And then Mr. Hurst is just like,
whatever.
okay, whatever. Here
Bye.
we go. Yeah.
So they leave, they go to London, and that's really it at this point. They're gone, and Elizabeth's like, good riddance. But she's also sad because at this point, she knew how Jane felt about Bingley, but I think Elizabeth was really the only one. So that's the unfortunate part. Poor Jane. She's so sweet.
She is so sweet. But
And she refuses to see, like, the negatives of anything. Like, Elizabeth sees that...
She saw the plot happening in the letters that Caroline wrote to Jane and everything. You know, she's very trusting. And so she's like, well, she wouldn't lie to me about that.
Yeah. And in the letter Caroline wrote, she goes on and on about Georgiana, and we hope to hereafter call her sister. Like, that's very pointed. And Elizabeth's like, yeah, I know what she's doing.
Right.
But Jane's like, well, they do have a longer acquaintance with her, and blah, blah, blah. She's making all these concessions for Caroline to, like, salvage her character. But Elizabeth's like, nah, I know who she is.
Right.
She's the worst.
She's the worst. And I think it's before Jane is unentangled from Mr. Bingley, though I'm not 100% sure at this moment. But before Jane's available, you know, Mr. Collins doesn't change his tune. He's
right. He's on Elizabeth.
His singular focus is on Elizabeth, and he proposes.
He does.
She declines.
Yeah.
And then he insists, oh, that's how this goes.
Yeah.
Women, to strengthen the affection of the man, they'll say no to the proposal, but really they mean yes. They just need to be asked a couple more times.
Yeah.
Yipes. Elizabeth.
Big yikes right here. Big yikes.
Elizabeth assures him that is not the case.
Yeah.
And luckily gets out of it. The Mrs. Bennet's very upset and says, if you don't marry him, I'll never speak to you. And then rock star Mr. Bennet says, yeah, but if you do marry him, I'll never speak to you.
Yeah.
So that settles the matter, and she doesn't have to marry Mr. Collins.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mrs. Bennet does actually treat Lizzie worse through the rest of the book.
She does. And then Charlotte.
Yeah.
You know.
Charlotte, I mean, Mr. Collins, he feels the awkwardness after the rejection, as you would.
But he's not a man on a mission. He came to get a woman.
He came to get a wife, and he's going to leave with a wife.
Yes, he is.
So he begins hanging out at Lucas Lodge, and who is there but Charlotte? And he asks Charlotte to marry him. She says yes. And then she goes to tell Lizzie, and Lizzie's like, but he's ridiculous.
Yeah.
He sucks.
He's awful.
And Charlotte's like, listen, stop it.
I'm old. I know the way this works.
You may be right, but I will have a roof over my head, and I will have all the comforts that I am used to.
Yes.
For the rest of my life, I will be set. Yes. And then they will inherit Longbourn.
Yes.
So that's a little bit of the weirdness there.
Not so much to Elizabeth, but Mrs. Bennet. Charlotte's probably been Elizabeth's friend for
her whole life.
She probably saw this girl as, you know, looked at her very fondly, and in an instant, she goes, this girl's gonna kick us. Mr. Bennet's gonna die. She's this Charlotte girl, this hussy, is going to kick us out of our house
Yeah.
and leave us destitute
Yeah.
in the streets.
And Mrs. Bennet just keeps saying, "Oh, I bet she calls them the Collinses. The Collinses are just out here talking about Longbourn all the time." And it's hilarious because Charlotte, as much as marriage is a business transaction for her, and it is equally for Mr. Collins.
Yes. It's not like one is madly in love and the other is smacked in the face with the reality. I think they both know the reality of the situation and are going to make the best of it.
Exactly. And Mr. Collins even said when he proposed to Elizabeth, he lists the bullet points of why he decides to get married.
Yes.
The first is that it is on the advice of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. The second is because he wants to set the example for the congregation as the clergyman. And the third is because he thinks it will add to his happiness.
Yes.
So the first two, I think, are probably the most important to him, the driving factors of why he wants to get married. So any woman will do, essentially.
Right. And I see no reason why he probably didn't also repeat those reasons to Charlotte. And she's like,
oh, yeah.
Yep, I know what I'm signing up for. Let's do this.
Yeah, she's like, done.
Got it.
So, I mean, I feel like it works perfectly for both of them because they have equal interests.
Yes.
Right? Both goals are accomplished in this marriage.
Yes.
Of course, we live in the 21st century. We would not want to enter a marriage like this.
No.
I would never want to marry someone as a business transaction. That makes me want to throw up.
Yes.
But I do understand it.
Yes. I mean, clearly it seems as if they like each other well enough. It's not like she despised him. It was like, he's a lot, but I'll take it. I can work with this.
She's a patient person.
Yes, she is.
And I think, she's like, I know what he's bringing to the table.
Right.
And I will do what I have to do to make myself happy in this situation.
Yep. And it works.
And it works out because she encourages him to be gone a lot.
Yeah. Go in the garden. Go do this. Go do that.
Yeah. And, she likes running her own house, making the decisions.
Yes.
And I'm sure that in the event that they have a child, it's implied that they eventually have a child.
Probably, yes.
I think at the end, in one of Mr. Collins' letters to Mr. Bennet, he talks about a young olive branch. So
yes. Okay, yes.
So they do end up having a kid, which I think Charlotte would be, like, a good mom, too.
Yeah.
She would have
absolutely.
a lot of, like, fulfillment in being the mother.
Absolutely.
So I don't think she's in a situation to make herself unhappy.
No, absolutely not.
So good for Charlotte.
Yes.
And also good for Elizabeth.
Good for Elizabeth. She's got Mr. Collins off her back.
Exactly. She is weird about it at first, though.
Yes.
But
more her disappointment is that Charlotte doesn't share her view that marriage should be with someone you have affection for.
Yes.
She thinks it's silly and ridiculous that Charlotte would marry someone out of convenience and survival. She's not about that.
Right. And I think Elizabeth's inability to sympathize with someone else's situation it is one of the reasons why she is deceived by Wickham.
Yes.
Because she already had her opinion on marriage, and, she saw her parents' marriage, which was, her parents were not in love, and she knew it and she saw it. And her opinion is that she's not going to get married to a man she doesn't love.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
And so seeing her best friend make the opposite decision, she just can't understand it.
Correct.
So I think her inability to be understanding is what gets her into the issues that she gets into.
Yes.
Luckily, she does recognize this and come around. But, I mean, and when she goes, at this point, Jane goes to London with their aunt and uncle, and Elizabeth goes to Rosings to spend a few weeks with Charlotte and Mr. Collins after they get married, which I think she has a really good time. I think that's probably one of the turning point for her. absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she gets to
Yes.
see that Charlotte is happy despite
Yes.
Mr. Collins being
Yes.
so insufferable. She meets Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is equally ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then who's there? Surprise!
But Mr. Darcy.
Just happens to be there too.
Why, I am shocked.
Right. Now, I do point out, Jane did not go to London to chase Mr. Bingley. That's just where her aunt and uncle happen to live.
Yes.
And so she's just taken some time away. She says she's not sad, but...
Girl's sad.
Girl's sad. But then Elizabeth is visiting her friend, Miss Charlotte, and then, yes, boom, there's Mr. Darcy.
There's Mr. Darcy.
So one of the dudes she thought she got rid of, who is completely insufferable... Mm-hmm. Here he is.
Here he is.
They're blessed with invitations to tea and meals at Rosings.
Oh.
So they hang out more.
Yeah.
More conversations. I love how the book just pops in, how he smirks after conversations with her, or just how he's looking at her longingly, or her eyes, or whatever.
Yeah.
And she's just completely...
She is
oblivious.
She does not have any inclination that he has feelings for her. Charlotte sees it immediately.
Right. And I mean, the dude's coming around just to hang out with her or talk to her.
Yeah.
He's not really interested in the other social goings on with everyone else.
Yeah.
But she's like, he hung around for a really long time. I don't get it.
And Charlotte's like, bitch, he loves you. So it goes on like this, and then he proposes to her.
Yes. Which to her is a huge shock.
She's hugely shocked. But this is right after she has just found out that he is the reason that Mr. Bingley left Jane high and dry.
Yes.
So she's mad. She's super mad. And he's like, yo, I cannot be quiet any longer. I love you. And I want you to marry me despite the fact that you're well beneath my societal rank and your family is poor and in trade.
Right.
And
it's
he
like...
says all of these things, and she's like, I'm so glad you insulted me so thoroughly before proposing marriage. That was super great.
I mean, he literally says that it's been painful for him to have feelings for her. He's fighting so hard against, I guess, what he believes either society or what he expects of himself. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, ugh, there's all these reasons why I shouldn't want you. But dang, I do. It's been very painful to hold this in. I'm now professing my love. And to him... it feels like it's going to be a relief, and she's going to go, oh, yes.
Yeah, and he's coming... Now, while he and Mr. Collins did not love Elizabeth, but Darcy genuinely loves Elizabeth.
Yes.
But they're both coming to the proposal with the expectation of a yes.
Yes.
Neither one of them foresaw that she would decline it. It didn't even cross their minds that she would say no.
Right.
Which is a super problem.
Super problem.
But I do love what Darcy says. He says a whole bunch of horrible things. And then he says, you must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. That's such a good line.
It is such a good line.
And if you wouldn't have said all that nonsense before it...
Yeah.
She was already pissed. She was absolutely not going to say yes, but...
That's true. So, yeah. So, in her response, she's like, a heck no.
Yeah.
And also, you ruined my sister's happiness.
Yeah.
She was in love with your friend. You put your nose in that business and ran him off. So, I'm mad at you for that. Mm-hmm. Secondly, my buddy Wickham over here says that you wronged him very harshly. And that's how they end it. He's basically like, okay, if that's how you feel, I will pick up my heart from the ground and leave you.
Yes.
Leave you to yourself.
Yeah, basically. But that is not where we leave it with Darcy and Elizabeth, obviously. So he goes back to Rosings and has a little time to gather his wits. And he writes her a letter. Which letters in general are really sweet.
I myself would like to start writing letters more often.
I know. So he writes her a letter, and he's not trying to convince her of anything, but
No.
he is trying to clear his name.
He's just trying to set the record straight.
That's right.
He's not like, I'm not expecting this to change your answer or even maybe, you know, make you like me more. I just want you to know the truth of the matters of which you have so harshly judged me.
Exactly. So he's like, first of all, yeah, I absolutely separated Jane and Bingley because I didn't think she liked him. Basically, that's it.
Yes. And your mom was pushing hard and her
Yes.
reasons did not seem based
Genuine.
on, genuine, did not seem based on emotion whatsoever. So,
Right.
And as harsh as that is for Elizabeth to hear, she has to admit, yeah, my mom's been very inappropriate.
Yes. And then he goes into the Wickham business and he describes, yes, he was conditionally left this living if he chose to take orders or to be ordained. He decided he did not want to be a clergyman. And so Darcy went above and beyond the will, paid him the value of the living, like £3,000 or whatever, which is a lot of money back then. And Wickham went on his way. And he gave Wickham money several other times, too, when he thought maybe he wanted to study the law or this or that. And eventually, Darcy's like, listen, this is it. This is it. You're cut off.
Yeah.
And then the worst of the worst, Georgiana and her chaperone, Mrs. Young, are, I believe, in London. And Wickham is like, the brother won't give me any more money, but the sister
She's
has
gonna
a large inheritance.
Yes, she's gonna inherit, what was it, like $30,000?
Yeah.
Pounds.
And which is almost equivalent. Dollars and pounds aren't, the conversion is not too far off.
But even back then, like, I mean, now to me, 30,000 is a lot.
I want to
But back then, back then that was
an
obscene amount of money.
Yeah. And so Wickham, so at this time, Georgiana's 15. Wickham's like, yep, I'm going to woo her.
And I'm pretty sure he's in his 20s.
Yes. I think that at the time, Darcy is 27. And Elizabeth is 20. And I think Wickham and Darcy are of an age.
The same age. And he's trying to woo this 15-year-old girl over here.
Yeah, which today we call that a crime.
Right. Back then was a little more acceptable, but still the way he went about it.
Yes. He knew that Mr. Darcy would absolutely not sanction this marriage. So he convinces Georgiana to elope with him, which is the biggest no for a woman.
I mean, it shames your family.
Yeah.
Not just your direct family, but like
all
the whole tree.
The whole tree is ruined by the one rotten fruit. Like,
Yes.
that is it.
Yes.
You are DONE, my friend.
Luckily, Darcy swoops in, is like,
Yep.
no, we're not doing this.
Yep.
Get out of here, away from my sister. Fortunately, doesn't say Georgiana puts up much of a fight. She probably respects and loves her brother enough to go, okay, I trust you.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Wickham.
Yeah, and I think, what did it say? I think she's actually the one who tells Darcy before the elopement actually happens because she felt guilty keeping it from him.
Yes. So there was no shame upon the head of their family. They did not swoop off into the night. So in learning all this information, obviously in the movie it happens much quicker, but in the books, I think as Elizabeth mulls things over and really thinks things through and sees the way her family talks and behaves when she's back with them at home.
Yeah.
She's convinced, like, oh boy, I was a fool. I cannot believe I so harshly judged this man based on these things.
Yes. And she's also seeing the deception of Wickham. Now at this point, now that she knows, she's like, wait, why didn't I question this when he was so quick? When the day I met him, he was so quick to talk some smack on Darcy.
Right. And Darcy didn't ever talk smack on Wickham, even when almost directly asked. He just was like, yep, nope,
Yeah.
I have a low opinion of him and just left it there.
Yeah.
He only divulged this because his honor was so gravely questioned.
Exactly. So
all the kids are back home now. You know, Jane's back home. Elizabeth's back home. We're all back home. Then now Elizabeth is going to go take another trip.
with the aunt and uncle that Jane had just been staying with.
Yes.
The Gardners.
The Gardners.
They're like...
We like the Gardners.
We like the Gardners. They're Mrs. Bennett's family, Mrs. Bennett's brother and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in trade, which is...
A slightly lower station, which we didn't mention, but that was another reason Darcy was somewhat ashamed of his affections for Elizabeth, because her close relations were of a lower standing in society.
They were the lower strata of the hierarchy.
Which I guess then was kind of a...
Yeah.
Great.
Back then, if you worked to earn your money, you were frowned upon.
Right.
You were not a dandy.
Right.
So.
Which nowadays people respect
it's
hard
quite the
work
reverse.
with your hands. So.
Yeah. So the Gardners are in trade. I do think that they're fairly wealthy, though.
I think
they're
they are.
significantly more wealthy than the Bennets.
Mm-hmm.
It's just implied. It's never said specifically, but...
And they have some children, but I believe that there are some male children in there, so...
Yes, if you have a male child, you're almost scot-free.
Right. You're like, my legacy is set.
Yeah, the estate is secure.
Right. So I believe... Right.
The one.
Yes. So do they leave their children with the Bennets while they go to travel and just... I think to just see some sights, see some lakes.
Yeah, so they are going out of Hertfordshire, which is the county that the Bennets live in, and they're traveling around to see some stuff, and they go to Derbyshire.
I mean, if they're... Derbyshire, I feel like...
Derbyshire? Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Gardner is from the county of Derbyshire.
Nice.
Originally. Yes. So they go over there. She's seeing some of her old haunts and stuff, but that is also where Pemberley is, which is Darcy's estate.
Yeah.
And they get to tour Pemberley.
Now, under the assumption that Darcy is not there.
Right.
Elizabeth makes sure, like, we can... I mean, I guess if you guys want to go see the estate... Because surely that's a thing back then. If you have a really lovely estate, people want to come check it out.
Yes.
You know?
I believe that's still how it is. You can go and see... I mean, when we were in England, we toured Windsor Castle, which is where Queen Elizabeth lived.
Wow.
So we couldn't go into her specific tower, but you can see, like, the rest, like, the main areas of the house. Very beautiful.
That's awesome.
And she was actually in quarters when we were there. They told us when we were doing the tour, like, if the flag is up, the queen is in quarters. If the flag is down, she is not in quarters.
To be like, I'm within a mile of the queen. That's amazing.
It was very cool. But I think you can do, like, a similar tour of all the major, like, estates and homes. Because they're all historical and most of them probably are, like, preserved and have original finishings and blah blah blah. So
it's very cool.
They tour Pemberley.
Yeah. Unlike today, where if you go to someone's house, even if you're best friends, if you show up unannounced, knocking on their door, they're probably not going to answer. You got to text someone first.
Do not show up at my house unannounced.
Right.
I just need 10 minutes.
Yes.
If you just call and you're like, hey,
heads up,
I want to stop by, I'm 10 minutes out, we're cool.
Right.
Showing up at my house without an alert, no. This is why I live at least 30 minutes away from my family. I mean, people, like, this happens to my siblings and Dakota's siblings. They're just like, oh yeah, mom and dad showed up. I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
How you mean they just showed up? No.
Yeah. So very unlike today, they're just gonna go check out the grounds, check out the house.
Yeah.
Darcy is not supposed to be there, so that's the only reason that Elizabeth agrees, because she is curious.
She is curious,
but she's so ashamed of how she behaved.
Yes.
And she's just kind of embarrassed. Doesn't want to face that.
She doesn't want to see Darcy.
You know.
But
Surprise again!
Surprise! Darcy is, in fact, home.
They check out the house before, but then as they're leaving, boom, he shows up. But,
there he is.
But guess what? It's a lovely visit.
He's very nice
to her,
to the gardeners, which she was very worried about.
Yes. So, I don't know how long they stayed, but I think they stayed in town longer than they had intended.
Yes.
And Elizabeth and Darcy get to have some more quality time together, but it's a lot more positive time together.
Yeah. So I think they're staying in like the inn in the town adjacent to Pemberley, and the next day, Bingley, his sisters, and Georgiana are all at Pemberley. And so then Elizabeth gets to meet Georgiana, and she has to see the Bingley sisters. And
the little demons that they are.
and she gets to see Mr. Bingley again, and he knows the specific date of the last time they saw each other, and she's like, yep, he still loves Jane.
Right.
Because you don't remember that date for any other reason.
No.
Come on now. So everything is now kind of like she's got more hopes for Bingley and Jane. I don't think she's quite to I love Darcy yet. But she's at this point reckoning with all of her own errors.
Yes. I think she's pretty convinced that his affections will not turn to love again, but she hopes that at very least
they're cool.
Yeah, that she'll be forgiven for her.
Yeah.
Her error in judgment. Yes.
And that Darcy will recognize that Jane and Bingley need to be together.
Yes.
So they have like a really great time. Georgiana really likes her.
Yes.
And I think she should have recognized that, because Darcy puts it towards Elizabeth like, I would really like you to meet my sister.
Yes.
I think that should have tipped her off, because he doesn't, like, his mom and his dad are not around.
Right.
She's his family.
Yes.
And I feel like Elizabeth should have been like,
yeah,
okay.
Right.
You want me to meet the sister?
Because if after a denied proposal, if you didn't still have intentions or feelings for someone, why would you go, oh, meet my only living family left?
Exactly. No. Yeah.
But in the midst of all this goodness happening, scandal.
Scandalous.
Oof. So we only barely mentioned Kitty and Lydia. Lydia is the youngest. She's by far the most...
She's silly.
Yes. Silly. Doesn't act proper. Doesn't really have any skills. We didn't mention this either, but the girls did not grow up with a governess, and school was for boys. So
yeah,
they have some musical skills, not really art skills. But Lydia and Kitty have just been able to gallivant about being vain and silly.
Yeah, they're vain, they're silly. They don't care about anything else except the instant gratification of the moment, and it has led to the demise of Lydia.
Yes. So Lydia, when Elizabeth went to go hang out with her aunt and uncle, the Gardners, Lydia went to go with a friend who was kind of traveling with the military group. Mm-hmm. Well, guess who swooped in on little Lydia, who is 16?
16.
Wickham. And not only has he, been, it's not like he was vying for her affections. No, they ran off.
They ran off together.
They didn't, and no marriage has happened yet. Nope. So they have skipped town together alone.
Ugh.
Not married. And as we said, that kind of scandal will ruin the entire family's reputation in society.
Yes.
Without question.
Exactly. So Elizabeth gets this news in a letter from Jane, and Darcy is on scene, and she's like, shit. He's never gonna love me now.
Right.
I'm ruined.
Right. We're all ruined. This is even worse than the impression he had of my family before.
Exactly.
This is the worst.
All of our prospects down the drain.
Right. So Elizabeth, the Gardners, they rush home to see if they can sort out the situation. Mr. Bennet and Mr. Gardner go out after everyone's kind of reconvened. They go out in search of Lydia and Wickham to set this straight. You wanna run off with my child? You are going to marry her, sir. And that is their intention, to find them and convince him to marry her.
Exactly.
If his intention is not to marry her, I don't know really what his intentions were other than to kind of, like with Georgiana, leverage some money out of somebody.
Yeah, I think it's such a, I don't know, it's difficult to say because with Georgiana there was a clear advantage. Like, I'm going to marry her, I'm going to get her 30,000 pounds, period. But Lydia, she doesn't have any money. No. I think in Mrs. Bennet's dowry when she married Mr. Bennet, she got 5,000 pounds, which would be separated between the girls upon hers and Mr. Bennet's deaths.
Yes.
So essentially 1,000 pounds would be Lydia's portion.
After the death of her parents.
There's
no obvious monetary gain, but this man, we find out, has been gambling and leaving debts all across the land.
All across the land. He left, Meryton is like the town near Longbourn, and all of those merchants are like, dude owes me mad skriller.
Mm-hmm. So, the book doesn't really say, I don't get the impression that he's madly in love with Lydia. Now, Lydia is just straight up in the clouds for this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I think it wears off. It's so surface level.
Yes,
I think he paid her some attention, so she loves him.
Right.
And also he's very handsome, I'm sure. But, he gives her that attention. She immediately responds, and that's it.
And basically, doesn't he kind of say, like, what was her idea to just run off?
Yeah, and which is not surprising with Lydia's character. She's obnoxious and impulsive.
Right, but you're a grown man.
Yeah.
And you should have said, no, honey, but...
Yeah.
If you wanted to marry it, then that's when you go, okay, but let's go get married. So,
yeah.
They're in the wind.
They're in the wind. But they are traced to London.
Yes. So, is it just Mr. Gardner by himself there at that point? And then he writes to Mr. Bennet, I found them.
No, Mr. Bennet does go to London.
Yes.
But he does come back.
He comes back before they find her.
Yes. Because, so eventually it all works out and we find out later that it's Darcy.
Yes.
He found them.
Yes.
And
at first we think it was Mr. Gardner, so we're like, oh, best uncle on the planet.
Yeah.
But actually, it was Mr. Darcy.
Yeah. So basically, whenever Elizabeth and the Gardners find out and they leave, he also leaves. And he is in search of Lydia and Wickham. And he kind of knows, because of what happened with Georgiana, he kind of knows, like, where Wickham is probably hiding out. So he finds them. And after Mr. Bennet comes back to Longbourn, Darcy and Mr. Gardner are colluding to figure all of this shit out.
Yeah.
And they contrive it all, I think Darcy pays all of his debts. Mm-hmm. And Lydia and Wickham are married.
Yes.
And
they only demand, what, like 100?
Yeah, her part of the 5,000 pounds and then 100 pounds per year.
Yeah, which is less than what that girl would spend at the shops every weekend. Maybe not every weekend, but what she would blow on trinkets and stuff. So
Mr. Bennet is kind of like in the black still.
Yes, yeah. It worked out good for him, and he's very thankful.
Yeah. So, that's all taken care of. Lydia's married. She's as insufferable as ever, does not see how the tight spot she put her family in, doesn't care about their woes or how it could have affected them. No cares.
Nope.
She's just like, I'm married.
Yep.
And Mrs. Bennet equally doesn't care.
Correct.
She's like, my youngest daughter is married.
Yes. Isn't this fabulous?
I've got to go tell the Lucases.
Yes.
First thing she does. She doesn't even, have her clothes on. She's just in bed. She's like, I have to go brag about it to my neighbors.
Yes. As she's been depressed the whole time Lydia was missing, as soon as Lydia's been found and then declared married, she's like, oh, we're amazing. I'm going to go brag to everybody. We're the best.
It's so great to have a daughter married.
Yes.
It's the craziest thing.
Yes.
But Jane and Elizabeth are just appalled. They're just, like, beside themselves.
Yes.
Like, what?
Yep.
Are you guys kidding me right now?
Yep.
But everything's good. We're taken care of. And then Lydia lets it slip to Elizabeth that Mr. Darcy was at her wedding. Mm-hmm. And Lizzie's like,
pardon me?
Excuse me? How you mean?
What'd you say?
So, obviously, she cannot be denied. She's got to know. And she writes to her aunt, Mrs. Gardner, is like, hey, what the fuck? Quite literally.
Tell me what happened.
So, Mrs. Gardner then tells her that Darcy is responsible, essentially, for saving Lydia's reputation and getting them married and getting him stationed at he's with another, like, regiment or whatever, Wickham, and with better pay or something. So Darcy's behind all of it.
Yes.
And Elizabeth and Mrs. Gardner's like, basically, she's like, yo, you know that the only reason he did all this shit is because of you. Just saying.
He's mad in love with you.
And at the end, she's like, and I just want to make a request that when you're stationed at Pemberley, that I can come, like, ride the horses.
Right. making assumptions out here, but not ill-found assumptions.
Not ill-found assumptions.
But before we even find out how Mr. Darcy feels, Miss Catherine de Bourgh shows up and kind of confronts Elizabeth, and she's already got it in her head that they're engaged, so she's grilling Elizabeth.
She
hard.
Pissed.
She's like, Mr. Darcy's supposed to marry my daughter, so again, it's a cousin, supposed to be marrying cousins set up here.
Yes.
And so she's kind of getting on Elizabeth about it, and Elizabeth is not wanting to play, along with this, and it's kind of fighting against it, but eventually has to admit, no, we aren't engaged. That, that's not what happened. But when Catherine de Bourgh says, well, then when he asks you, if he asks you, when he asks you, you'll say no, right? Elizabeth's like, I will do nothing of the sort.
Yeah, I shall not agree.
Yes. So she leaves quite upset that this little woman has not
bent to her will.
But, and very much to the detriment of what she was trying to do, that is the exact thing that convinces Darcy.
Yep.
He's got a chance.
And not only does he have a chance, he brings Bingley back for his chance too.
Yes.
So, Bingley and Darcy come back. Bingley, he wastes almost no time. He's like, listen, Jane, we're doing this thing, right?
Right.
And she's like, we definitely are.
Right.
So they're engaged. They're happy. They don't care about anyone else at this point.
They didn't fight about it the way that Elizabeth and Darcy did. It was just like, oh, we're apart. Oh, we're back together. Yes, this is what I wanted.
Exactly. I like what Mr. Bennet says. He's like, they're so kind that all of their servants will cheat them and they'll always live above their means or whatever.
Yes. It's so sweet.
But, so they're married, they're taken care of, and Caroline and Louisa, their hopes for Georgiana dashed.
I can go cry in a corner.
Yeah, get over it. And, Caroline Bingley, she's gonna be further disappointed, because Darcy, he comes back and he's like, I still love you. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth's like, you know what? I actually kind of love you now, too. So, thanks for saving my whole family.
Right. I believe she loves him for more than that, but that, all the things that happened really turned the tide in her heart. Yes.
And so, Darcy and Elizabeth are engaged, and Mr. Bennet, he's so shocked. He's like, hey, I thought you hated him.
Yeah.
So she has to convince her dad, because he's like, at this point, I think Mr. Bennet probably is thinking, she's marrying him because he's rich, and it will save the family.
Yeah.
But she convinces him, like, no, that's not it.
Right. So. And then we just have Kitty and perhaps we forgot to mention Mary.
Oh, the fifth daughter.
The fifth daughter, the middle daughter.
So sorry. She doesn't have a big role.
No, she's quiet and smart.
And studious.
And also called plain. Poor girl.
They call her the ugly duckling of the family, which is unfortunate.
Right. But now that 3 out of the 5 are, out of the nest, Kitty stops being so vain with Lydia gone. Kitty has a bit more good influence hanging out with Jane and Elizabeth. And then Mary's just, the only one to be extra fussed over. And she comes out of her shell a little bit.
Yeah, now that she's not living in the shadows of her sisters, she kind of has a chance to blossom.
Yes.
So...
And then Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, too. Once Mrs. Bennet doesn't have children to shove around into Richmond's laps, she calms down a bit.
Yeah.
And I believe the affection between her and Mr. Bennet kind of grows a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah, it is nice. And, so the end, we have, a fairy tale ending, right? But I feel like in the classics... most people want a happy ending. I think now most people want a happy ending, for sure. I personally like to go against the grain, and I like a little bittersweet in my ending. I want it to be nice, but I want it to hurt a little.
I can appreciate and respect a good bittersweet ending, and especially if it fits the story well, but I'm a sucker for... I want a pleasing, happy ending. If I'm going to do something for entertainment, I want it to make me feel things, but I hope most of those things that I feel are good things.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that this novel or any of her novels would not have been successful if the endings had not been good.
Right.
If it would have ended and Jane didn't marry Bingley and Elizabeth didn't marry Darcy and they ended up being single forever, I don't think that the books would have been well received and we probably wouldn't be talking about it right now.
Right. And people would have been like, well, what was the point then?
Exactly. Why did you tell me this story?
Right. It went nowhere.
It literally did not leave Longbourn. What are you doing here?
Right. But yep. It's a wonderful book, and like I said, I like a lot of the conversations that Darcy and Elizabeth have, and I think it's especially interesting that they actually have an argument about how Bingley is so agreeable, and he'll say that he could leave his estate in 5 minutes time if he wanted to, but if someone asked him to stay, he would stay. And Darcy kind of gives him a hard time, like, so you're so wishy-washy, you would make a statement like that, but then you would be so easily bent to other people's wishes. And Elizabeth's like, why would that be such a bad thing? Like, he's being agreeable to, he listens to the wants and feelings of other people. That's not a bad thing. But then when Mr. Darcy tells him, hey, don't marry that girl, and he does it, then maybe Elizabeth should see that, oh, okay, Mr. Darcy had a point.
Yes, exactly.
So just things that played out that way and just the thought-provoking things. I just really enjoyed the whole thing. Yeah,
it's such an enjoyable, and you can enjoy it on, like, so many levels. Just take it at face value as, like, a love story, and in any love story, there's going to be a conflict, and then you get the payoff at the end, or you can read it a little more critically and see the critique on society. That's one of the things I really enjoy about Jane Austen's writing is she's telling the story of Elizabeth and Darcy, and peripherally the story of Jane and Bingley, but she's also, there are little, like, comedic reliefs in there, like certain lines about, like the Mr. Collins character, and the way that Mr. Bennet really like, he even says, I wouldn't give up Mr. Collins' correspondence for the world, because Mr. Bennet finds him so ludicrous that it's so funny to him, and he loves it so much, which is why he says that Wickham is his favorite son-in-law, because Wickham is so ridiculous. Yeah. He's, like, so, once it's revealed about his character, he's so, like, over the top narcissistic and self-centered that Mr. Bennet just loves it.
I had hoped he meant it sarcastically because I dislike Wickham so much.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah. It's so the little tiny elements of satire throughout the novel really make it for me.
Yes.
Because, I'm sure you can read like any romance, any run of the mill romance story, but this one is it's doing more than that.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I've always loved Jane Austen's books. I always say for people who are interested in dabbling with the classics that Jane Austen is your first stop. Mm-hmm. Because the language it's really palatable once you get into the cadence of the prose and you get used to the rhythm of it. It's so smooth and easy to read.
Yes.
Other classics are more difficult. The language and the construction of the way things are written is very, very different. So it's harder and takes longer. But Jane Austen gets you acclimated to kind of the way they talked.
Yes, yeah.
So I would say Jane Austen's a first good step for anyone interested in the classics, but is intimidated.
Yes.
It's the first step. Yep. I think it was probably my first classic was Jane Austen.
Yeah, yeah. And mine as well, and I'm glad I did. But we won't just be sticking with classics. We will be bouncing around to different genres, and
we're reading all of it on this show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you have like a rec, you can certainly email it to us.
Oh, absolutely.
We didn't say our email originally, but it's wereadbookspod23@gmail.com. So you can email us.
Yes.
Or you can send us a DM. And we'll take your recommendations.
Yeah.
We have a fairly lengthy list divided by genre of books we want to do, but we'll add some shit. It's
absolutely
fine.
And the list could certainly be longer. There is no shortage of books in the world, so
absolutely. And we're interested in the good, the bad, and the terrible.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I love a bad book.
Well, never. Yeah, we won't just bash something to be harsh. There will, there's always a silver lining to be found. Well, maybe not always, but
I have a few in mind that I feel like do not have any silver linings.
Right. But it'll still be fun.
It's still very
discuss.
Fun. My favorite book podcast is Smug Book Club. They almost never put out episodes anymore. They're two British guys, and they're so funny, and I just really love listening to them talk about books. And there are a couple that they do that I really think that we would have fun doing.
Yeah.
The books I fully anticipate being terrible, and I own right now that I would come with a bias because I've already listened to their reviews.
Yes.
But I think both of them are like written by men who kind of probably subscribe to the alpha male agenda. So I think our perspective on it would be really nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. We're going to do so many things. So
yeah. Yeah.
Next week we're going to do Verity by Colleen Hoover.
Yes.
It is a contemporary thriller.
Yes. So you'll hear our thoughts on that next time.
You really will. And it's gonna be fun.
It'll be a hoot.
It might be more fun than this one.
Yes.
So you can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. That would be real cool. And you can tell us how you like Pride and Prejudice if you've read it. If we inspired you to read it, that would be
let us know that
to
too.
know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all the things that you do for every other podcast, we would like it to.
Yeah. Obviously, the higher the stars, the nicer that would feel. But, be honest.
We'll take constructive criticism.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe with a little bit of chagrin, but we'll keep that to ourselves. So I think that's it for this episode.
Yeah.
First episode in the books.
Boom. Done.
Whoa. Dakota is my partner. He and I created our artwork, the logo, together. He's a much better artist than I am, but
they did a splendid job. They're both incredibly talented people.
But he did. See, I was when I was working on the sketch He did tell me that my mushroom stems looked like testicles. And I was very abashed when he said this to me. I was like, so insulted.
And then did you take a look and think?
And then I saw
Dang it.
Then I looked at it and I was like, fuck. I'm not going to tell you that now that you've said it, I see it.
Right. Absolutely not.
But I am going to erase them.
Right. He saved us.
He saved us. So
You did a great job on it.
he did a great job. He could have maybe not pointed that out to me.
Right.
But
Well, you did, and you did a great job. Probably before and after.
I do have a tendency to not see things in innuendo often.
I do not either.
Like, it never occurred to me that the stems would look like genitalia. Not even a little.
Mm-hmm.
Until he said it.
Yeah.
We're going to sign off for now. And until next time, please be happy.
And read books.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.